welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hi, this is Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. I am really excited to welcome back this author who we spoke about, I believe, The Haunting of Moscow House last time, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, which was super. And now we are back with another historical horror, which was very
Mystery,
interesting. Yeah,
mystery, historical
mystery.
horror mystery.
Mystery. Yes, there's mystery in it too. Yeah. And it was very interesting. Why don't you tell us about yourself and about this book?
Sure. And so my name is Olesya Gilmore, and I am I would say dark fiction author. So I write anything historical fiction, horror, fantasy, with specific emphasis in gothic horror at the moment. So this book is my newest gothic suspense novel. It is a story about a young fortune teller named Zina, and she is living in 1920s Paris. She works and lives with her grandmother in their tea room, which doubles down as a fortune telling business after hours. And the story really starts off when an exiled Romanov royal seeks Xena out. She and her brother are looking for their dead father in the spiritual realm. And so they ask for Xena's help to summon him during a seance. Xena does so, and she is shocked to find that she has summoned a vengeful spirit, and one who not only starts to haunt her grandmother's shop, but also knows something very sinister about her mother's death, which happened. It happened to happen in the tea room about 20 years before. Xena, not only has to figure out what happened in the past, all the dark secrets that her grandmother and mother held, which kind of come rolling back into the present. But she has to figure out herself and this new power, which she kind of was aware of, but was not very practiced in it. And so she has to figure that out in order to kind of save their tea room, but also their lives, which are threatened by everything that's kind of coming back from their past. So that's a little bit about what it's about.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. So first of all, because I feel like this sort of came up in The Haunting of Moscow House, because you did deal with similar themes of these sort of people who were technically royalty or
Yes.
um, that have been displaced. And in this
Yes.
particular case, I mean, how many displaced Romanov members of the royal family really came and settled in Paris?
Yeah, so actually, it was known as the capital for displaced Russians in general. There were all kinds of Russians that settled after the revolution and civil war that happened, and then of course the Soviet regime. And so many people fled, much as what is happening now. And they went really all over the place, but they mostly came to Paris because it was relatively close and it was well known to them because many of these people already visited and lived in Paris before then. It was really known. I mean, it was very popular for Russians, especially the upper class Russians, as well as intellectuals, to visit Paris, to spend significant time there. And a lot of these people knew French. And, whether you're an intellectual or are a professor, you're more of an aristocrat or noble, French during that time. And so it was familiar, they knew French people who also came to Russia. And so it really became the capital of Russian intellectualism. There were many writers that settled in Paris, and thinkers and philosophers and teachers. And then, of course, you had the the displaced Romanovs, who settled in Paris. And sometimes they would go to other places before, but they would end up in Paris. And the reason is because all of the kind of major Romanovs that survived ended up there. And so they had this kind of like de facto capital, so to speak, of their community. And there was a lot of like infighting between them, which I kind of have in the book, where no one really believed that the Soviet regime would last. And so they thought that they would come back. And so they would fight over who would be the heir. They would fight over their fortunes. There was this kind of secret Romanov fortune that was supposed to go to the Romanov who would inherit the Tsar or Tsarina title. And so, everyone was after it. Everyone was also just after money and survival. Even kind of the higher Romanovs, they lost everything. And so there was only some people lived well, but most of them did not. Even if they were princes, there's always like that idea of the Russian prince driving a cab in Paris. It's a very famous picture in the 1920s and even into the 1930s. And that was very, very true, that these people, even princes, even nobles, even aristocrats, would be living with nothing. And so they would do anything in their power to, get back into good graces, have that title back in reality, as well as money, because that was survival. Yeah, so many, many, many people lived there.
Yeah. It was very interesting. And, like I said, like this kind of came up in The Haunting of Moscow House. But, our poor main character, Xena, she has like this gift.
Yes.
And she's sort of like taken aback when this princess and her brother come for this fortune, and her grandmother's like, yeah, I don't trust them, don't trust them.
Yes.
um it's hard for her because she has a lot of questions about herself. And it was sort of interesting how you melded like a classic sort of vengeful ghost story with a murder mystery. Like it sort of blends those genres. Like I wouldn't, like when people think of horror, there are many different types of it. And this is definitely, like she attaches herself to something that won't go away.
Yeah.
And it's just, like there's this dark history with the tea room. But it's also told from the point of view of her grandmother,
Yes.
where you find out where her grandmother connects to this case, this mystery, and how the tea room itself came about. Um, did you always kind of see the dual timeline, dual perspective in this?
I did want to do dual timeline and I did want to do dual perspective, simply because my vision for this from the very beginning has been to write a generational story. I wanted to, explore. First of all, I really like exploring generations of a family. I did that, I think, in all my books so far. I've explored the concepts of family in different ways. And I find it incredibly interesting, especially with people that came to Paris. They just had such a rich history before they came to Paris. And in general, emigres and immigrants, you have this very rich and complex history before you come to your new country. And there are certainly a lot of secrets. There are certainly a lot of baggage. And so I just felt this was a story that really lent itself to the generational story. And of course, you have to have both of those devices in a generational story. What I didn't know in the beginning was who was going to be my point of view character. I mean, I knew I wanted a younger character who grew up in Paris. So she's kind of like me in that way because I grew up in the States, but I've always kind of just been surrounded by the Russian culture. Wanted her to kind of not belong to either culture in a way because that's kind of how I feel. Yeah, so I just didn't know who would be doing, the storytelling except for the more younger generation. Um, I thought at first it would be the mother. But then I quickly realized when I was working on the story that I wanted her to be part of the mystery. And I wanted her to I actually wrote 100 pages of the book or 150 pages of the book with the mother's perspective. And it just didn't work. I didn't connect with it. And so I started writing it with just one perspective because I was like, well, maybe this is just not going to work. I knew I wanted a generational story, but maybe it might not work. And when I started writing about Zina's grandmother, Baba Valia, she just jumped off the page for me. She became so real and so natural, and it was very fun to be her. And so she kind of just took over. That happens from time to time where you don't expect, when someone, when a character is going to work. And she just worked for me. I really connected with her. And she provided that very necessary link to the past, to Russia, to what happened in Russia that still affected them, that followed them essentially to Paris, which a lot of these people did experience, that baggage of their past that I was talking about. And she I had my two perspectives, and the dual timeline again, it really lent itself to the grandmother story because certain things that happened, I had to go into it because then it would be just very surface level if I wouldn't.
Okay, and I also want to ask about just like the whole fortune telling culture in general. Like
Yeah.
the tea room and the type of fortune telling that Zena and Valia do. Was that widely practiced in Paris at that time or in general?
Yeah, I don't know about widely practiced. I really wanted to do a fortune telling book just because I wrote, my first book was each book I feel like I've studied a part of Slavic spiritualism or fantasy, folklore. And so this one, I really wanted to explore fortune telling. I actually had a character who was a fortune teller in The Haunting of Moscow House, my second book. And I was intrigued because I did some research on her and on Slavic fortune telling, and I was just very intrigued. So I really studied like Slavic fortune telling, specifically Russian fortune telling. Some of it I knew just from my own background, and I was very surprised to learn that the fortune telling that I learned about was something that the women of my own family practiced, which I was very shocked. I didn't ever associate those practices with fortune telling, but then I was like, oh, yeah, my great aunt read my palm all the time. My grandmother would give me a little magnet and it would swing, and she would tell me, you can ask it questions. If it swings, forward and back, it's a yes. If it's right to left, left to right, it's a no. So it's things like that I realized, oh my goodness, there these beliefs I'm reading about, I remember them, and so that just became personal for me. So some of those concepts are in the book as well. Um, so I think it is practiced. I think it was definitely more common during Imperial Russia. With Soviet regime, it was definitely spiritualism and magic of all sorts. It became more secret, but there is a flowering of it now. After starting with the 90s, I've read that there is kind of a resurgence back to that belief because, I mean, a lot of Russians are very superstitious. And so I think it's natural. I mean, it's so fundamental to like the culture almost, you know. I mean, the fact that I had fortune telling in my family was very surprising to me, really. So yeah, so I did a lot of research on that, and I kind of, you know, made it my own, which is what I do throughout all my books. Is my magic, in this case, fortune telling, is very much grounded in the real fortune telling traditions and practices in Russia. And I did find that there were fortune tellers catering to the Russian emigre community in Paris, which really kind of solidified my idea to write this story about fortune tellers in Paris in the 1920s and about this grandmother and granddaughter.
Well, it was a really good one. Do you have anything on the slate? Anything you're working on at the moment?
I am. I am working on another Gothic suspense. I can't say too much about it yet, but I'm really excited about it. It's a different time and a different place, but I like a challenge. It's what makes this so fun for me is to explore different time periods and different countries too. So I'm very, very excited to work on it, and I'm about 50 pages in, so that's you know, not nothing.
How long does it usually take you to work on a book from start to finish?
You know, from start to finish, I can't really say because the idea phase is so long for me. I mean, I think for this current idea, I actually thought about it for about a year before actually putting like pen to paper. And then I worked on it for another, I would say, like 4 months for the proposal stage. So a lot of this is driven by the publishing process. And my editor, for example, requires a proposal instead of writing the full book. So I'll kind of work on, you know, on that with my agent. So that was kind of a very long process this time around. And yeah, so and then just writing the book, usually about 3 months is what it takes me to write the full book.
Wow, that's actually a really quick turnaround.
You know, yes, but then all the editing, then it takes forever. You know, usually I spend a few months editing by myself with my agent's feedback, sometimes my critique partner. And then, you know, from then on, it's really up to the editor and the publishing process at that point. So I mean, I don't know, a few years at least it takes. It's a long project to be on. That's why you really have to love what you're doing and be very curious about it. That's my major thing. I have to be challenged. I have to be curious, and it has to be something new.
Olesya, thank you so much. Pick up the Fortune Tellers of Rue Daru. Am I
Ruderu?
Rue Daru?
I think so. I'm not a
Yeah.
French speaker, to tell you the truth, but I think so.
Okay. I was like, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly. Pick it up, and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
Thank you.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.